Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Chris Miller.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Well, please be seated. Thank you. Thank you all very much for joining us for what I think will be a fascinating discussion on the European semiconductor industry and semiconductor supply chains and their role in geopolitics. We have three perfect guests, I think, to discuss this topic, both from the perspective of industry and government. Andrej Heinke, Ambassador Lindström, and Andreas Schumacher joining us today. Where I'd like to start is the state of the European semiconductor industry right now. We're going to talk, I think, a lot about vulnerabilities, about resilience, about challenges over the course of the next 50 minutes. But maybe I can start with Andreas. When you look at the European chip industry, what are the strengths you currently see, and what should Europe be doing to fortify its position in those segments of the supply chain?
Thank you, Chris, and first of all, thank you for having me. The European semiconductor industry is strong. Just to give a few numbers, automotive semiconductors, by far, European companies lead. Power semiconductors, the ones which you use to switch on electricity in everything from a data center to your cell phone charger, European companies by far are in the leadership. Sensors, if you look at sensors, non-optical sensors, European companies, European headquartered companies, and you have two of them being represented here, represent almost 75% of the global market share. And those are all important technologies for the future, whether it's for AI, whether it's for military and defense applications, or whether it's just for consumer applications. And then, of course, if we go either down or up the value chain, you find similar points of strength. Probably most of the audience here knows ASML, they know Zeiss, they know Trumpf, they know some of the chemical companies. So there are real strength in the European industry, strength Europe can build on. There are also gaps, and selectively filling those gaps in a smart way, not trying to be best everywhere, but working with partners, with allies, to be strong in a combined way. I think that's the big question which the European industry is facing, but also, frankly, the industries in the US and Japan and Taiwan and many other places of the world.
And Andrej, when you look at the strengths that Europe has, what should Europe be doing to solidify its position in those segments where it currently is strong?
First of all, belief in itself, in its capabilities, and to kind of forge trusted partnerships. Tomorrow, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, will be meeting with Chancellor Merz. They'll be announcing a major initiative about having AI activities based in Germany at the heart of Europe, and that's just the beginning.
Andreas, anything to add from your perspective on the role of the EU or the role of member states in ensuring that their specific segments of the industry remain quite strong? Andreas, anything you'd like to add there?
Oh, I guess the EU can do its part. Member states can do its part. Just like the European Union is not large enough in itself to build a complete ecosystem. Neither, and even less so, are the member countries. So working together in once again identifying strengths, strengthening those strengths, and working on the weaknesses in a smart and meaningful way, and also I should add in a commercially driven way. So you shouldn't look at the semiconductor industry only as an island, but it's embedded in a larger industrial ecosystem. And then again, I should have mentioned that before, there are so many industries where Europe is strong, and perhaps a view across the Atlantic shows that a lot of discussions there these days are about bringing industrial manufacturing back home. And you could probably comment from that side of the Atlantic. But I would say Europe has always been the envy of the world when it comes to industrial manufacturing, industrial high-tech manufacturing. So definitely a strength to build on.
Well, let's bring in the geopolitical angle. Ambassador, you've focused now for some time on the role of semiconductors and their geopolitical importance? Obviously, in East Asia, there's extraordinary production capacity, which has been a source of much discussion. And I think the challenges in US-EU relations have also added to the complexity of these supply chains from a geopolitical perspective. So how do you see the evolution of that question right now?
Well, everything is really about partnerships, because the value chain of the semiconductor value chain today is so incredibly complex and interdependent that no nation, even no conglomerate, can control the whole value chain by its own. So you need to build partnerships to be able to develop and create a resilience in a sense, because we're also dependent on these issues. And I many times saying that there's only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that's to fight without allies. And that really resonates in many ways, because when you look at what's happening in the world from a geopolitical perspective today, it's really about creating partnerships, creating allies, kind of topical-based entities when you can work together for a common goal. It's also about values, of course, and it's easier to work with other countries and entities that share the same values with you. So that's really the key. But just also a short note on the European perspective is that the first what we have to do in Europe is to recognize that it's a real crisis and really react to that crisis. Of course, the Commission is reacting it to a certain way, but personally, I would love to see it happening even faster and even more purposeful on these issues. I mean, let's not waste a good crisis. Let's see where we are going.
And what's the implications of the crisis you're discussing for semiconductor and technology supply chains? Walk us through how you think that should play out.
Well, it's not only the semiconductors, it's the whole technological value chain as whole. It's 5G, it's quantum, it's a lot of things that come in there, and everything is intertwined in this. And we really need to step out of that. And the Prodi report was a good stepstone, but I see that should just be the beginning. And now let's actually do something, not write reports, but really, really fast action. Also on the financial side. I mean, we've seen already big steps on what's happening in Germany, and also from the Commission side, how to finance this whole development. I think we've been living a little bit in a fairy tale for too long, and now we have a sort of rude wake up, and it's time to act.
When it seems like there is a tension, perhaps, and on the one hand, the desire for Europe to build its own capabilities, to become a more important actor in tech supply chains, and more broadly, with the need for partnerships that we've discussed. What's the right balance to strike between doing it by yourself and finding your specific notch in a very complicated supply chain that brings together partners from Asia and from North America, inevitably?
Well, I don't believe that you should do everything yourself. I mean, the world is more prosperous when we have a free trade, when we have many nations participating in that. It's very clear to see where we are going. How can we then create this kind of cooperation? I mean, in today's world, we have, for this to prosper, for this to be enabled, we need stability, predictability, and consistency. And we lack all three right now. Being a diplomat, of course, I never look at these things in a short term. I always look at the long term, how can we do these things? And the world never becomes better by turning your back to it, which means that you have to keep up the connections, you have to keep up or build these partnerships for the future. And it's just a little bit of, should we call, cracks in the mirror right now than anything else. But when you look at it in the long term, there's so much to gain for everybody.
Well, I'd like to encourage the audience to submit questions via the Slido app, and I will have them on my iPad to pose to our panelists. But I wanted to ask a similar question to Andreas and to Andrej in terms of thinking about the geopolitical fragmentation that we're seeing in the world right now, next to the need for chip companies to sell globally, because of course scale is critically important to efficient production. How are companies managing these dynamics, and how are they trying to navigate them? Andrej, do you want to start?
Well, my company is a truly global company, 420,000 employees, and only 130,000 in Germany. So we have many thousands in the US, many thousands in the People's Republic of China, and we have to cater to all of our customers. I can think of two countries that tried to do it by themselves. One is Argentina and the other one is North Korea. Not that successful, in competing, in delivering solutions to customers. What I see is a fracturing world. I'm rather less optimistic about relying on partners that dominate platforms or cloud computing. Europe has many solutions. It's not a single solution. Now we have to be better in delivering a one-stop shop to our customers. But being a truly global company, we have to rely on different providers of cloud solutions. For instance, in China, it's a different provider. In the US, it's a different provider. And accordingly, all the services, state services, are interested in the data in China, in the US, and increasingly in Europe. And we have to be aware of that. So it's less about values, it's more about interests.
And that sounds like a less efficient world too, if you end up having to have different suppliers in every region. Andreas, anything to add from your perspective?
Even if I start with something which actually you in your book laid out very eloquently, the semiconductor industry is fundamentally a global industry. I'm not sure whether it's the most global industry, but certainly amongst the most global ones. And it is an industry like very few others which benefits from economies of scale. So if our world becomes more fragmented, some of those economies of scale will be lost. I think we would be naive if we wouldn't realize this trend already happening. So I think what, speaking for a company is important in this context is first of all, you want to know where your North Star is. You want to be with your customers. You want to be where innovation is. But at the same time, you also, and this is probably true for any semiconductor company, so much of what we build our success on is built on intellectual property, on the ingenuity of our engineers, and we want to protect that. This is in the very natural interest of our company, of many other companies, and that naturally leads you to be more cautious in some regions and more open in other regions. So if I project into the future, I foresee a world which is not going to be as open, as free anymore, and there will be a convergence between classical trade consideration and national security consideration. We see this emerging in many regions of the world. And just to pick up something the ambassador said before, starting with trusted partners, with allies at the core is certainly a good start. And then see how far you can get with that. And at some point you might reach a border where things become a little bit difficult, but being together with a group of partners and allies as a start, I think that's a very powerful proposition.
And in fact, if you want to build scale, you need those partnerships.
Let me add just the magic word is diversification here. Don't rely on a sole provider anywhere. If the dependency ratio is higher than, let's say, 40-45%, you have to kind of find additional suppliers.
Well, that's a great segue into the first question we've gotten on supply chain resilience, because one of the challenges in the semiconductor supply chain is that there are places where you've got only one supplier or two suppliers, and having diversification is either hard or impossible. And so when you look at the European semiconductor supply chain, which of course is integrated into the rest of the world's semiconductor supply chain, how should we think about resilience, given that for certain segments of supply chain, there are in fact these natural monopolies that seem to occur? Anyone want to take that, please?
Well, I'm just thinking outside of that, it's really, really difficult in so many ways. I mean, we have let's say that you have a chip with a US design, and then you have the machinery is Dutch, the fabs are Taiwanese, and everything is packaged in Asia. I mean, how do you really manage that in a way that you will have control of everything? What was said, of course, that you have to have several different sources for your, so that you don't rely on one single source. And I sometimes jokingly, what I said is that when you think about it, what is it now? 91% of the advanced chips go at some point of the value chain through Taiwan. And what will happen if something happens in Japan? So I jokingly say that the world peace is not upheld by political conductors, but by semiconductors, because we are also dependent on what's happening in that value chain. So it is, and everybody wants to have a larger piece of the pie, investing in building fabs, in building whatnot, but still we are very far from it that anyone could control the whole value chain.
Well, insofar as you're right that the integration of semiconductor supply chains is a stabilizing factor in international politics, then it also seems to follow that any country driving towards self-sufficiency would be a destabilizing factor. I'd be interested, Ambassador, you have reflections on China has spent a lot of money over the last decade trying to become self-sufficient, and it's far from self-sufficient yet, but it's making steady progress every year. Do you see that as actively destabilizing as China needs to rely less on imported machines and materials and semiconductors from the rest of the world?
In the long term, yes. Because it's not a society that works with the same values as we do. And they utilize also that then for their own interests and then put pressure on other countries by not providing them or something similar. So in the long term, yes.
No, I tend to disagree. I think it's stabilizing. Yes, of course, they have different values, but they have their own national interests. And if we look to where your iPad is being assembled, that is in the People's Republic of China, and the consumer electronics industry is mostly located there. And the Chinese have lately become the upholders of a multilateral trade system. And so far, we have to see that the one destabilizing force is not China at the moment.
I suspect that car companies trying to source their magnets might disagree with part of that statement, but perhaps we could save that for a different debate. Let me pick up another question from the audience. And if there are other questions that haven't been on Slido, but you'd like to raise your hand, please feel free to do so, and I'm happy to bring people in live as well as via Slido. Question from the audience on how close we are to technologically reducing our dependence on high-end semiconductors, or are we in a world in which actually we're going to use more and more and more chips indefinitely into the future? Is it an alternative to the semiconductor supply chain and the dependencies and the resilience risks that it entails?
First of all, the dependence on semiconductors is not going to go away. I could have brought a chart. I'm trying to describe it, but you see over the last 50 years, the input factors to generate $1 of GDP, and on one scale you see oil, and the amount of oil needed to generate $1 of GDP has constantly decreased. And if you look at the other axis and plot the value of semiconductors for the equivalent $1 of GDP has constantly risen, and I don't necessarily see a change there. I think if I look at the question, one of the aspects which I find worth at least exploring for a moment is what the person referred to as high-end semiconductors, because often we talk about the dependency on those high-end semiconductors from NVIDIA, manufactured by TSMC, but it is, I would argue, just as important or even more important that we have a secure supply of those, how you call them, foundational, some call them mature, some call them legacy semiconductors, which make up the semiconductors which keep patients in hospitals alive, which make our cars drive, which provide the necessary smartness for an electrical grid. So if we don't have the latest generation of very, very, very high-end microprocessors, maybe we would have to go 1 or 2 generations back in our cell phones, and our large language models wouldn't be quite as powerful. But I would argue life 5 years ago or 8 years ago was still good. If we would go into a world where we don't have some of those foundational semiconductors, it would be lonely and cold and dark.
But this is actually, I think, a key point, and we know it's true because we ran this experiment during the pandemic when we had shortages, not of the high end, but of the foundational semiconductors, and faced huge shortages in everything from autos to medical devices. And I think you're absolutely right that the phrase high end is often misleading in terms of the importance. And of course, Europe has some unique capabilities in specialized foundational semiconductors that are quite important. We have a question from Ben Tellis. I don't know if he's in the audience here. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Tomáš Klavania. I'm based in Prague at New York University. How do you see the future of Moore's law, and how is that really connected to innovation in your field?
We have two experts here on the panel. I'll turn that to either of them, or maybe three, Ambassador. I don't know if you have strong views on Moore's law.
Well, I think we are coming close to what's physically possible. That's for sure. But the end of Moore's law is far away, and industry has surprised us many times before. Innovation in Zeiss or Trumpf technology is amazing. You wrote about the most complex machine that was ever built, and it is still increasingly complex. What we should never underestimate is, I wouldn't call it frugal innovation, but different innovation coming from players in Japan or in China, in the People's Republic of China. We haven't mentioned GLOBSEC yet, they are capable of surprises. And they have been the source of innovation for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Why should we not trust them to come up with innovations in semiconductors?
Anything to add on Moore's law?
Yeah, maybe more of a technical remark. You are probably well aware that Moore's law has sort of flattened out for certain types of semiconductors already many years ago. It is still arguably slightly slowed down in effect for some of those very small node sizes. But we should not forget that Moore's law initially was fundamentally driven by economics and is still driven by economics. And so I would agree that we might come up with different ways how we can make economic progress in what semiconductors can deliver. And there is opportunities in innovation as well. You alluded to quantum. Now, I'm not going to say that there's going to be a quantum computer which will replace a semiconductor computer, but there's areas where we can make higher performing computing devices, and we can make economic progress on other aspects of the tech stack.
Ben.
Thanks very much, Chris. Benjamin Tallis, now of Helsing, the defense AI company. So the question I asked up on Slido came from having read your book, Chip War, as I'm sure many of us in the room have. And I thought one of the real strengths of that book was showing how it was the nexus of state and private actors that allowed, during the Cold War period, free societies to build a technological lead, sustain it, grow wealthy from it, and use it to geopolitical advantage. That's what I called in the question free society's superpower. So my question to the panel is, how do we reactivate that in order to thrive in a very geo-competitive world? Abusing my privilege of being in the room, one comment to the discussion about values and interests that came up. We are in a geo-competitive world. Europe is one of the last bastions of strong democratic values. I put it to you that our values are in fact our interests going forward, and that false distinction between the two should be abandoned in developing our strategy. Be interested to hear our thoughts on that too. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent, thank you. So how to reactivate the innovation potential of free societies?
You mentioned in your book as well, and that's how you came to the topic, that comparing the advantages of the Soviet Union and the United States in space exploration. And the Soviet Union committed basically the mistake in semiconductors in copying American technology. And that's why it was always 1 or 2 steps behind. I doubt that the People's Republic of China is committing the same mistake. Yes, they spy. Yes, they copy. But not only. They try to foster their own genuine innovation. And Japan is trying to do the same. And Europe is doing the same. And that's just basically the basis for advantages. Interests and values are very much part of the game. But it means you have to prioritize. You cannot be strong everywhere. That's too expensive. The next wave of investments will cost billions. I remember the HEUV technology took Zeiss, ASML, and Trumpf close to 20 billion. The next wave of investment, and Andreas, you know that better, is built on alliances that are built on trust, but trust that is based on interests and joint investment. And if you have skin in the game, then you are able to achieve success. Andreas.
I guess you wanted to say something?
Ambassador, please.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm changing a little bit the topic from a perspective that how is the technology used? And I'm thinking about, for instance, 5G networks, and the same kind of situation that we have providers that what we call trusted providers, and we have providers that come from authoritarian countries. And how do they utilize the 5G technology in different ways of creating dependencies, collecting data, or do we have something that we can work in partnership and with an open dialogue? And when you utilize the networks in that way, that you are creating a dependency without any possibility for a country, for instance, to defend their digital sovereignty because they don't have access to the network, they can't update the network, the manuals are in Chinese, and you're bound with that network for the next 10 years, maybe 15 years. That's the kind of crisis or risk scenario that I see being created not only in the 5G sector but also in other technologies. And that's when we come back to the values, really, that what values operate your digital sovereignty. And data as such, of course, then data is the ultimate currency in the world today in many different ways, and you can call it the oil, you can call it data plutonium, whatever you want, but this is the scenario that keeps me awake at night. And how do you utilize that dependency then in different ways? We've seen that in so many countries already that when there is a political crisis or maybe one business still goes a little bit south, suddenly the cranes in the port stop working. Suddenly we have a situation in the critical network that starts creating problems in the whole thing. And when you have that kind of a dependency to technology from one country that is not necessarily following the same rules as the other ones, that's where the risk is.
Well, could I draw you on the implications of that? Because I think I agree with your description of the 5G debate expanding over time to more and more spheres of the economy as everything is connected. You mentioned port cranes, you could talk about autonomous vehicles, you could talk about drones, you could talk about automated industrial equipment. There are many different spheres, I think, where that basic dynamic is present, at least to some degree. But when I look at what Europe's done thus far, it's been only on the 5G front, and even there's been a vigorous debate over the last 10 years. And so it doesn't seem to me that Europe has actually addressed the challenge that you're bringing up.
No, absolutely true. And in Europe, of course, we have the 5G toolbox. That is a recommendation that creates the sort of security measures that should be taken in each country. How many countries has implemented the toolbox? 2 out of 27. 100%. So that 2 countries have a clean network. And this is also the essence of the problem in Europe, is that why don't the other European countries then support their own industries in a way so that we can create that kind of a clean network environment where we know how these things work and we are not dependent on anyone else, and the risk is mitigated in many different ways. So this is one of the wake-up calls of Europe, really, in a sense. And what we are seeing now is, of course, that we are moving into a 5G toolbox that will become more mandatory. Of course, the issue that is there and also about who has the competence. 5G networks and the security issues, it's a matter of national competence. So the Commission has no competence in that one, but let's see how it's going to be navigated. But there are big solutions in the making right now on that. And I see 5G is one issue, but of course then we talk about standards and the way we are dependent on future standards, because 6G standards are developed right now. And how do we create those standards so that it meets these kind of security arrangements, what we are looking for. So big issues are in the making right now.
And
on 5G, I remember Graham Allison from a neighboring university, from Tufts, who told me that in the discussion about 5G, the Americans had demands on Europe. Did they have a technical alternative? No. The alternatives were coming either from Nokia or from Ericsson. And it will be an interesting game with 6G.
Andreas.
And Chris, maybe just to expand on this idea a little bit, because both of you talked about the slowness of adoption of the 5G toolkit. If we go back, what the original impetus was, it was to keep Huawei out of Western networks. So it was, if you want, a little bit abstract, a blacklist, which is something more controversial in Europe. The European society is a very open society, a trusting society. But so why don't we, rather than stigmatizing, we flip it around and start from a whitelist. So and again at a very abstract level, rather than excluding others, we work with trusted partners and allies. And this is a smaller group initially. And just like Europe grew, because you had countries at the borders of Europe who found what Europe had done in terms of economic scale, in terms of values, aspirable, they joined eventually the European Union, and in order to do that, they had to adopt some behaviors, some standards. So why not do this in a tech world as well, or even when now we talk about very narrowly about semiconductors, bring trusted countries, allies together, and allow a free flow of trade, a harmonization of standards, a trusted chip standard, however this may be defined. And then you can ask other countries who also want to join this trusted club, sure, you're welcome. However, there is a list of requirements which you need to fulfill. And if you can fulfill those requirements, you're welcome.
And it strikes me that that's similar to what you hear in Japan, when Japan thinks about trusted suppliers of semiconductors and technology in Taiwan and Korea as well. Ambassador, does that seem to you like a viable approach?
I think that's exactly what's going on right now. And it happens also through legislation, so that it's set in separate countries' legislation that they have to provide or they have to utilize trusted vendors, trusted technology. For the sort of digital sovereignty on the country. And of course, it's in the whole value chain. It's not only 5G, it's the semiconductors, it's all the other issues. That's exactly what's going on right now.
And I think at least the way I conceptualize the expansion of what we're looking at is it started with networks and telecoms, and now it's autonomous systems and everything that enables them, whether it's autonomous farming or autonomous industrial applications. That, I think, seems to me to be the primary focus. And of course, you need many different types of semiconductors, advanced and foundational, to enable these more semi-autonomous systems. I think the second half of the question that sparked this conversation was about catalyzing Europe's own innovation ecosystem, if I understood it correctly. Could I put that one to my panelists as well? What more does Europe need to be leading when it comes to semiconductor innovation, or is that a mistaken assumption, and is Europe already leading in the spheres where it's currently strong?
I think the longer the Trump administration is applying pressure to European companies, the more innovative European companies will become. And they'll develop diverse suppliers and networks. Trust is one thing, and we have known each other for decades, but we have to realize this is a different world. And we can continue to talk on these kind of conferences about things that seemingly haven't changed, but they have fundamentally. And that leads us to a different standard of trust, probably a rather limited circle of trusted vendors. Most often, those trusted vendors and partners will be Europeans and will be probably belonging to the same nation. That is exactly what is so difficult in the semiconductors world, because it's becoming more expensive. It's only efficient if it's a global industry. You made that point many times before. But there are other partners, South Korea, Japan, and probably, European players that will compete in accordance with Taiwanese players. Infineon, NXP, Bosch, and TSMC are partners in a project in Dresden, in Saxony. And NVIDIA, you could argue that they have a huge Taiwanese component. They are interested in developing diverse customer bases. I mean, TSMC in Taiwan is seeing this semiconductors industry as a kind of reinsurance, not only towards the mainland, but to the US as well.
And so you think there's a way that Europe can have a Europe-first procurement policy, but not sacrifice the economies of scale that we discussed as being necessary to commercial success?
It's very difficult, but that is an aim.
I agree.
We have a question from Scott Bade, which I thought would be interesting to bring. Scott, are you in the room? Here we go, Scott.
Here we go. Hi, thank you. Thank you. Scott Bade, Eurasia Group. Work on tech issues there. I'm curious, coming from the United States, obviously the US is both on the CHIPS Act and on export control sort of led trends that are really impacting and buffeting your sector. I guess the specific question is, what would you like to see the US, out of the US right now? Is it, what would be most helpful? Is it more continuity? Is it relaxing export controls? Is it, more subsidies? More subsidies are great, but they also are fueling a talent war and other things. So I'd just be curious for your reflections on what is coming out of the US and what you'd like to see out of the US on the policy front.
I saw a two-finger over there. Two-finger from the audience, please.
Vitaly Shklerov, Tufts University. Thank you so much, Chris, for the wonderful panel. I just want to hang on and connect to the previous question of Chris. We were talking about we cannot do it all, dependency, 5G. So I'm curious, which emerging semiconductor technology, from your point of view, present the biggest opportunity for European Union, for Europe right now? And I'm not saying from just a possible scenario, but what's doable? So I would be curious to know. Thank you.
I'd like to not forget Scott's question as well, but Andreas?
You gave us a few seconds to think, so I'm gonna give it a try. An openness to working with allies in the field of technology to mutual benefit. If you want me to leave it in one sentence, I'll leave it at that. And I would say that this openness is really key to our industry. The semiconductor industry will not thrive if every region and every country wants to do it by themselves. I think we've all three elaborated on that. And there are voices in the United States which seem to imply that that's a direction the government wants to go in. There are also other voices. There are strong voices, and a lot of those strong voices are here today and tomorrow, and they speak very proudly and fondly of this alliance between Europe and the United States. And I hope that spirit of an alliance, of working together, also in the technology sphere, will be what drives the relationship forward. And that you can apply in the very large, but also in the very small. You mentioned export controls. There's discussion about tariffs. Let's not unnecessarily trip each other. Let's walk together. And if we identify a weak point in export controls, let's try to do that together, because only then will it also be really meaningful and strong.
The point about scale, I think, is interesting, Andreas, because you do have the world's three largest economies, China, Europe, the US, roughly comparable in size. And so if any two of them pair up, they have a huge scale advantage vis-a-vis the third. And so it seems like one of the geopolitical questions is, well, which pairings do you get? Which pairings do you want? And that's a question of political importance as well, just as of industry importance. We have a question on energy and climate, which I think is a critical question, both because energy and climate are important themselves, but also because AI has, I think, transformed the impact of the computing sector on energy demand. How is the semiconductor industry, how are governments thinking about finding energy efficiencies in our computing technologies?
That's an essential question. It's not only related to energy, but to water as well. And it's the durable supply of both. That is connected to a huge European advantage, stability. Yes, you can go to the Middle East, as G42 did with our partner Microsoft, but you risk that you go to a place that is not exactly democratic. And we talk a lot about values, but what happens if decision-making capability, war-fighting capability, is probably dealt with not only in the Middle East, but a little bit further east towards China, because these people probably have not the same values as us. Yes, energy is rich in the Middle East, it's rich in Northern Europe as well. It is connected to sustainability. It's connected to probably Europe not being able to change climate globally, but to set an example and to define standards that will be probably a guiding spirit to the rest of the world.
Other thoughts, reactions?
So I agree. I'm just wanting to provide an example of what's happening with data centers in the north of Finland, Sweden, many other parts. I mean, the energies, they are basically run on renewable energy, wind, solar, water. What is remarkable there is the excess heat is 100% utilized because they heat our societies. And that's just a typical example of how we think about these things in the long term. It's not just that you provide cheap renewable energy and build a data center there. You also look at the whole value chain there in a sense. How can you utilize that excess heat? And most of the data centers that are being built now, it's really sort of the whole circular economy is working in many ways. When I meet some of the industry representatives and I tell about these possibilities, they're sort of like, what? Really? Can you do that? The thing is there, of course, that we have already a built district heating system. I know that they're doing the same thing in Ireland now, but they have to build a system from scratch. So it's a little bit different, but that's really, like you said, it's providing an example of how you can do these things and in a sustainable way. So it plays a big role.
Well, it does seem striking to me how the question of climate, geopolitics, and the geopolitics of energy and computing have all come together in a very visceral way the last couple of years. And Andrej, you mentioned G42, the UAE firm trying to make the UAE an AI superpower is what they would describe it as, taking advantage of their comparative advantage in money, but also in access to energy, of course, unmitigated in terms of its carbon emissions. Time for one final question, which we have via Slido, about the EU Chips Act and what should come next when European policymakers and the EU Commission start thinking about what the next CHIPS Act, if there is one, ought to look like. We've had a bunch of different topics on the agenda today, how to think about energy, how to think about innovation, how to think about building scale and partnerships. Final reflections on what the EU should be doing next as it thinks about the CHIPS Act. Andrej, let me start with you.
The EU started moving. The current CHIPS Act will not be the last one. It's just the beginning of a good story, and we have to continue along this path.
Yes. Don't waste a good crisis.
Focusing on strength and building out those strengths.
Fantastic. Well, three very concise pieces of advice to the European Union. Please join me in thanking my fellow panelists for a fascinating discussion and an excellent wrap-up for our day.
Thank you, Chris.
So, thanks very much. It's time to wrap up the thing. Panelists, please sit a little bit thing. The first day was excellent. Thanks, Chris, for wonderful moderation. We've gone through a lot. Alliances with Global South, AI, propaganda, etc. There's more to come, not here, but elsewhere. So I start first with the housekeeping rules. Some of you will go to the dinner. So there are 3 buses going, 7:10, 7:20, 7:30. Make sure to catch those, because you don't want to walk up high heels up to the castle. Trust me on that one. So 7:10, 7:20, 7:30, outside the exit, basically. Then we start again at 9 o'clock tomorrow with Jan Lipavsky. You don't want to miss that one, so don't drink too much at the castle. Okay, 9 o'clock, you're all going to be there. I will be there, so please join me. Takeaway thing, I would say, the quote that probably resonated the most was from Mr. Zelensky himself. We're all in this war. If Ukraine fails, Putin will go further. I don't want to put you in a bad mood because of that, so let's just head to the castle now for drinks. 7:10, 7:20, 7:30. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.